Welcome to episode 47 of Gods and Heroes of Ancient Greece. My name is MyLinda, Butterworth, and today we begin with the epic tale of the Seven Against Thebes and the story of Polynices and Tydeus as the guests of Adrastus. Adrastus, son of Talus, king of Argos, had 5 children, of which 2, Argia and Daplia, were daughters. Concerning these, a single oracle had been issued. Their father, so it was said, would wed one of them to a lion and the other to a boar. In vain, the king pondered over the meaning of this strange prophecy, and when the girls were grown, thought only of finding them husbands as quickly as possible, so that nothing might come of the terrible prediction. But the gods see to it that their words are fulfilled. From 2 different directions, fugitives came to the gates of Argos, one from Thebes, Polynices, who had been driven from the city by his brother Itycles, and the other from Tydeus, son of Aeneas, from Calydon, from which he had fled after unintentionally slaying a kinsman in the course of a hunt. The 2 met in Argos in front of the palace. Night had fallen, and in the darkness they took each other for enemies and began to fight. Adrastus heard the clash below, descended with the torch, and separated them. As they stood to the right and left of him, 2 stalwart heroes, the king started as though he had seen a spectre, for on the shield of Polynices was a lion head, while the head of a boar stared at him from that of Tydeus. Polynices had chosen the lion for his emblem in honor of Heracles, while Tydeus had given the boar in memory of Meleager and his hunt for the Caledonian boar. But Adrastus understood the meaning of the oracle. The fugitives became his son-in-law. The eldest daughter, Argia, was wedded to Polynices, the younger Daplia to Tydeus, and Adrastus pledged both princes to reinstate them on the throne of the countries from which they had been exiled. Thebes was chosen as the goal of the first expedition, and Adrastus summoned the heroes of the land, 7 princes, including himself, with their 7 hosts. Their names were Adrastus, Polynices, Tydeus, Amphiaraus, the husband of Adrastus' sister, Capaneus, his nephew, and finally Hippolyton and Peripathetius, brothers of the king of Argos. But Amphiaraus, the king's brother-in-law, who had been his enemy for many years, was a soothsayer and foretold a disastrous end to the whole campaign. First, he tried to shake Adrastus and the other heroes in their resolve, but when he saw that his efforts were in vain, he went to a hiding place, which no one knew save Ariphiles, his wife and sister to the king, and there concealed himself from all men. For a long time they searched for him, since Adrastus did not want to go without him, whom he called the eye of the host. Now, with Polynices had been compelled to leave Thebes, he had taken with him a necklace and veil which Aphrodite had once given Harmonia at her marriage to Cadmus, founder of Thebes. But both the necklace and veil were fraught with death for the wearer, and had already caused the destruction of Harmonia. Shemule, the mother of Dionysus, and Jocasta, wife of Polynices, who was also to drain the cup of sorrow, and now her husband decided to bribe Ariphiles with a necklace, and thus get her to reveal the whereabouts of her husband. Ariphiles had long envied her niece, the magnificent jewels the stranger had brought her, and so when she saw the glittering gems linked with gold, she could not resist. But Polynices to follow her, and led him to the refuge of Amphiaraus. The seer could not well evade joining his fellows, all the less because when he and Adrastus had called a truce to their feud, and the king had given him his sister to wife, he had promised to let Ariphiles be judge of any future disagreement which might come up between her brother and her husband. So Amphiaraus girt on his armor and assembled his warriors. But before he set out, he called his son Alcmaeon and had him swear a solemn oath that the moment he heard of his father's death, he would take vengeance on the wife who had betrayed him. The heroes set up Hypsipyle and Opheltes. The other heroes had also completed their preparations, and soon Adrastus stood ringed by the mighty host, which set out in 7 divisions, commanded by 7 heroes. They left the city of Argos, their hearts high with hope and assurance, and the fanfares of trumpets and shrilling of flutes speeded them on their way. But long before they arrived at their destination, misfortune overtook them. They had reached the woods of Nemea. Every spring and river and lake had run dry, and they were tormented with heat and burning thirst. Their armor weighed upon their limbs, the shields were heavy in their hands, and the fine dust their feet whirled up in the road settled on their dry lips and gritted in their mouth. The very foam flecks dried on the jowls of their horses. They distended their nostrils and chomped at the bit, their tongues swollen with thirst. While Adrastus, with some others, were searching the woods for a spring or a well, they came upon a mourning woman of a singular beauty. She was seated in the shadow of a tree, a boy-child at her breast, and though her dress was mean, her floating locks and proud bearing gave her the appearance of a queen. The king was overwhelmed with astonishment, and thinking that this must surely be the nymph of these forests, he fell on his knees before her and implored her aid for himself and his men who were perishing of thirst. But the woman cast down her eyes and answered him humbly, "I am no goddess, stranger, and if you see about me something which is more than mortal, it must have been stamped on my features by greater suffering than others bear. I am Hypsipyle, daughter of Thoas. Once I was queen among the women of Lemnos, but I was seized by pirates, and then, after unutterable misery, sold as a slave to King Lycurgus of Nemea. The boy I am nursing is not my own. He is Opheltes, the son of my lord, and I have been chosen to tend him. As for you, I shall gladly help you procure what you need. A single spring still gushes in this desolate waste, and no one but myself knows of the secret approach to it. There will be enough water to refresh all your host. Follow me." And the woman rose, laid the child tenderly in the soft grass, and lulled him with a little song. Adrastus and his men called the others, and soon the entire host crowded the narrow woodland path after Hypsipyle. Winding through the thick underbrush, they reached a rock-hewn gorge. Over it hovered a cool spray. It blew into the hot faces of those who had outstripped the queen, walking with their leader, and slacked their skin with moisture. The sound of water falling over stone in a torrent grew louder and louder. "Water!" they cried exultingly, leaped down into the ravine, and stood on wet boulders, catching the jets in their helmets. "Water! Water!" echoed the host. Their voices rang above the surge of the cascade, and the cliffs echoed the shout. They threw themselves along the green margin of the brimming brook, which issued from the ravine, and gulped the sweet, cool water in long, satisfying draughts. They found a wider passage for the chariots. The charioteers did not stop to unharness the horses, but drove straight into the swirling tide, where the brook broadened to a river, and let their beasts cool their sweating flanks and dip their weary heads. While every man and every creature was refreshed, Hypsipyle guarded Adrastus and his followers back to the road, telling them of the deeds and sufferings of the women of Lemnos, while the hosts followed at a respective distance. Before they reached the place where they had seen Hypsipyle under the arched branches of a tree, her ear sharpened by watchfulness for her nursling, plainly caught the frightened wail of the child, which the rest scarcely heard. She herself had been the mother of children, left behind in Lemnos when the pirates took her away from those she loved, and now all her love was lavished on little Alphates. Her pulse beat faster with foreboding. Swiftly she ran to the place where she had helped the child to her bosom. He was gone, and she no longer heard even his voice. But as her eyes swiftly searched about the trees, she suddenly realized the terrible fate which had befallen her charge, while she was doing a kindness to the Argive host. For not far from the tree lay a hideous serpent, coiled in idle repose, heavy with the meal it just had made. Her very hair stood up in horror, and her cries of agony trembled on the wind and were carried to the heroes, who hurried to aid her. The first to see the serpent was Hephaestion. Without an instant's reflection, he tore a rock from the ground and hurled it at the creature, but the stone rebounded from the scaly body and crumbled as if it had been a handful of earth. Then Hephaestion lunged at the monster with his spear. It sped into the gaping jaws, spattered the grass with the serpent's brains, and the point came out at the crest. The body turned like a top on the long, projecting spear, and the hissing breath came in slower and slower gasp, until the creature lay dead. And now the poor foster mother dared follow the traces of the child. The earth was red with his blood, and at last, far from the trunk of the tree, she found a pile of little bones picked bare. She knelt, gathered them in her lap, and gave them to Adrastus. He buried the boy who had lost his life because of them, and arranged a solemn funeral feast for him. In his honor, they founded the Nemean Games, and worshipped him as a demigod under the name of Anchmoras, the early perfect. Hypsipyle did not escape the rage which the child's death kindled in Eurydice, wife of Lycurgus. She had her slave imprisoned, and vowed she should die the cruelest of death. But by the grace of chance, Hypsipyle's eldest sons were already on the trail of their mother, and soon after these happenings they reached Nemea and freed her from captivity. And here I end my tale for today, but I'll be back with more tales, many more tales. Until then, my friends, enjoy the journey.